Welcome back. Mayoral Showdown. The Chicago mayor's race is heating up as we get closer to the election, and Lauri Lightfoot looks like she is on track to lose re-election. We'll look at the biggest issues of the campaign, who the biggest candidates are, and who's on track to win. Plus, I'll be joined by 46th Ward Democratic Committeeman Sean Tenner to talk about the mayor's race, his career, and more. Today, February 17th, 2023. From Ishan Media, this is Ishan S. Show, a podcast about the interesting and ever-changing world of American politics. With me, your host, Ishan. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Ishan S. Show. We're so happy to have you back on now. My voice may sound different because we're not in our normal recording studio, and I think for the next couple of weeks we might be in that situation. So just bear with me while I record on my iPhone until we, get back to normalcy. But anyway, let's move on to today's episode topic. Now, local politics is probably one of the most important levels of politics that you can look at. And I know, I've said it repeatedly here on the show, and it's going to be something that I'm going to stress for as long as this show continues to cover politics, which is that politics is about people. And politics derives from, at least here in this country, from the people, from we the people. And you can look at a presidential election, and you can look at the big ticket issues that they talk about on those debate stages. But what really matters to us at a day-to-day level are the taxes that we see at the grocery store, or the quality of the parks outside our homes, or the size of the sidewalk of our house, outside our house. Local politics is the most important politics, and that's why I've had such a big focus on hosting local candidates, local political officials here on my show in order to raise more awareness about local politics. And today's topic is no different from that, and we are going to be talking about the Chicago mayor's race, which is local politics. Now, it's been over a year since we've talked about a mayoral election here on the show. I think the last time was in 2021 when we were talking about the New York City mayoral competition there. We had Maya Wiley, we had Andrew Yang, Catherine Garcia. I believe Catherine Garcia was in that race. And then, of course, Mayor Eric Adams, who won that election and was sworn in last year. According to most people's expectations, he was going to win. We did not anticipate anything major on this show. New York City, mayor's race, nothing important. We all knew Eric Adams was going to make it. And I was listening to the episode where I was recorded the mayoral election in New York City, which was also on my iPhone, by the way. That's funny. But there was a little more predictable. They used this newfangled ranked choice voting system. That's what made things a little interesting. But for the most part, I think we weren't surprised to see Eric Adams win that election. Chicago's mayor's race. This is going to be a little different from that election. This election is actually going to be considered one of the more close elections in recent memory in Chicago because it's very unclear of who's going to come out on top when we look at this race at the end of it. Right now, we're looking at an incumbent mayor, Lauri Lightfoot, who is in a terrible position, honestly, as an incumbent. She has, to her credit, seen a lot of difficult times in her tenure, but indeed, she's not in a very good position to actually get reelected. I think if there were a few reports coming out, at least from the local political analysts, that if they were to rate the chances of what Lightfoot might have, they said pretty low, and that Lightfoot will not be on top. And that's coming from a lot of people. Some people in recent days have started sugarcoating it, saying that Lauri Lightfoot is in the top 3. But let me explain how elections work here in Chicago. So it's a little different from the way we're used to, because most of the time we're used to an election resulting in just whoever wins the most votes is the winner. However, in Chicago, what happens is you'll have a big group of candidates in the first round running on the ballot. Of those candidates, if no one gets a 50% plus one majority, then the top 2 make it onto the runoff election. Now, here in Chicago, that's usually in April, and that's similarly going to happen this year. It stays the same. Now, this election system is kind of similar to Georgia, where in statewide elections, they have a runoff system where you either get an outright majority in the initial election or the top two candidates then proceed to the runoff, which happens a few weeks later. Now, for the record, the mayoral election is going to have its first round on February 28th, and if there is a necessity, which I'm fully expecting for there to be one, there will be a second round on April 4th. So mark your calendars. Now, if you remember, for those of you that do remember or pay attention to local politics, the last mayor's election was in 2019 between Lauri Lightfoot and Toni Preckwinkle, who is the president of the Cook County Board of whatever. She was also a prominent Chicago area politician. And if you're local to the area, you probably know them better. But Lauri Lightfoot ended up winning that election with, I think, 70% of the runoff vote. And she has, in her tenure, seen a lot. And I mean, you don't really expect to see everything that she has seen as a big city mayor when she was sworn in. She has overseen the city through the COVID-19 pandemic, the killing of George Floyd, and the subsequent protests and conversations on police brutality that happened after. She has been deeply involved in trying to prevent the increased crime here in the city. She has seen teacher strikes and has also overseen the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Now, for that last part, Roe v. Wade, that is, I don't think people might be able to understand why that's relevant, but for a big city mayor, especially like Lauri Lightfoot, that issue is a big issue because in politics, we like to call Illinois an abortion island, where surrounding states have essentially forbid abortion access. So Chicago has opened up as a safe haven or a center for women across the country, but specifically here in the Midwest, to come get access to that abortion. And Chicago specifically has more of those clinics. So Lauri Lightfoot has been on the forefront of this issue in the Midwest, as states like Indiana and Missouri and Iowa, sorry, I'm blanking out on states, in Iowa, they all restrict abortion access. Now, there is a lot that Lauri Lightfoot has dealt with. And when you get that increased clout, you also faced increased scrutiny. And that's what I think we're seeing in this race right now. What we're seeing is Lauri Lightfoot face a lot of backlash for her handling of all kinds of issues. Because, for all the people that are out there to praise her work, there are plenty more people that will be out there to criticize her that do not approve of the work that she has done. And I think it reflects in the approval numbers that we see. In the most recent poll that I've been able to find, she had a 29% approval rating. Which, if you listen to this podcast and you know anything about politics, that is a terribly low number to have. And it really just highlights and underscores the struggles in that Mayor Lightfoot is going to face. Because when those kinds of numbers, it's going to be a struggle. Now, who are the challengers that are going to be going after Mayor Lightfoot? So I'm not going to go through the field of all 9 candidates because, to be quite honest with you, most of them are irrelevant. And I say irrelevant because it's 9 candidates. 7 of them are going to have a bad day on February 28th. Let's look at the top candidates that we really care about. So I've just covered Lauri Lightfoot, who is usually put in 3rd place. Now I want to focus on 2 specific candidates. Those are Representative Jesus Chuy Garcia and former Chicago Public Schools CEO Paul Vallas. These 2 people that are the most likely men to be sitting in the mayor's office in April if things don't go according to plan for Mayor Lightfoot. And why I say that is because remember how I said when we were discussing projections that generally Lauri Lightfoot was not going to be in the top 2? Garcia and Vallas are that top 2. And they are going to probably be making it off to the runoff. A local network here, NBC5, said that in a matchup between Garcia and Lightfoot, it's Garcia. In a matchup between Vallas and Lightfoot, Vallas. In a matchup between Vallas, Lauri Lightfoot, and Garcia and Vallas proceed. Now, between Vallas and Garcia, that's the open question. So it's pretty clear that both of these men have this appeal that I think Lauri Lightfoot has not been able to touch at. I think it's just this plague of the incumbency that some politicians, unfortunately for them, end up facing. These two candidates, I think, have gained a lot more notoriety through all kinds of means. And when you're in local city politics, building that profile is especially important. And when you have an unpopular mayor, it's important to be able to come across to the voter and say that, hey, I understand your issues and I am ready to fight for you because the mayor right now doesn't seem to be taking care of you really well. That's the accusation they get to make. And I'm not saying that Lauri Lightfoot hasn't been doing that. I'm just saying that that's the criticism that she's been facing. Whereas these two candidates are, technically speaking, at a local level, a little more untested than Lightfoot is. And that's always the challenge of reelection. You'll see it at state level politics here in Illinois, at least. You'll see that in state level politics. You're going to see that happen to Joe Biden in 2024. You're not going to be guaranteed reelection, even if it is a reliably Democratic city. You need to contend with, the challenges people are going to criticize you. But anyway, the point is, according to a Northwestern University poll, Paul Vallis is leading the pack with 19%. He's followed by Garcia at 17%, and then Lauri Lightfoot is at 14%. There's also another candidate, Willie Wilson, who is at 12%. But in general, most of the voters are undecided and are not really committing to any candidates in the general. So it's likely that these two men will probably be on your ballot in April, unless somehow Lightfoot, pulls off a miracle and wins 50% of the vote plus one. That's not happening, though. So what are their policy views? It doesn't matter. They're all Democrats, so it's not like anything different or anything major. They're going to stick to the same playbook. It's just their approaches on how they want to combat some of these issues. Someone wants to increase the police presence. Someone wants to decrease it. Some people want to increase educational funding. Others want to focus that money elsewhere. It's pretty tit for tat. It's not like they're going to differ significantly on issues. They all have the same platform that they're going to run on. They might specialize in a few issues. At these types of local level politics, especially in a big city where it's about Democrats most of the time, you're looking at the candidate's quality. You're looking at candidate quality. You're looking at their characteristics. You're looking at their experience. You're not really looking at their politics. You're not looking at their policy views. So I want you to take a look at that power structure. And understand that we are with an incumbent mayor who is not, very likely at least, not going to be in office, although, of course, Lauri Lightfoot, who has this seat, won her current seat as an outsider 4 years ago when everyone else said she would fail. So just maybe, just maybe, she might be able to pull off something big. But, that'll be decided by the voters of Chicago in the future. All right, that was some information about the Chicago mayoral race. That's going to be happening in just a week and possibly a few more weeks if we have a second round. When we come back from the break, I'll be joined by 46th Ward Democratic Committeeman Sean Tenner to talk about his career, the mayor's race, and more. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this short break. All right, so we're back from the break. Now, you might have heard about the Chicago municipal elections coming up in just a few weeks, and they've gotten incredibly contentious. Mayor Lauri Lightfoot is looking like she is on the cusp of losing re-election as issues such as education, violent crime, and the economy take center stage in local politics. Our guest for today's episode is not one of the 9 candidates running to be mayor. However, he is deeply involved in Chicago politics from his work in the 46th Ward of the city. Here to talk about those topics and more, we're joined by 46th Ward Democratic Committeeman Sean Tenner. Mr. Tenner, thank you for joining us on the Sean S. Show today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
All right, so before we get into the interview, why don't you take a few moments to introduce yourself to my audience?
Sure. So my name is Sean Tenner. I actually grew up in Naperville. Went to college out in Georgetown in Washington, D.C. And I came back to Illinois afterwards, and I've been involved in managing, consulting, and advising political campaigns for 22 years now. And so our firm, is involved in races all the way, as we say, from the courthouse to the White House. I worked for President Obama in his Senate race in 2004 in DuPage County, and on his presidential race in 2008. After the Obama presidential race in 2008, started a firm called K&I Communications, and we've had hundreds of political clients as well as foundations, advocacy groups, and nonprofits. And the area that I represent as 46 Ward Committeeman is Wrigleyville, or portions of Wrigleyville, right up to Wrigley Field, though not including Wrigley Field, Buena Park, Lakeview, and Uptown. So my office is right next to the historic Uptown Theater and literally above the historic Green Mill Jazz Club, which is the oldest freestanding, continuously freestanding tavern in Chicago. So in the evenings, we get free music piped up through the floor. And most recently returned from India, as you know, or as our viewers may not know. Ishan's father and my wife Shivali went to IIT Kanpur together, and so I was able to learn a little bit about Indian politics when I was on my trip. So our ward is one of the highest turnout wards, in the city of Chicago, and expect that we will be again in the February round and the April round.
Very good. And I guess the free music is nice every day.
Yes.
So now specifically about your work in the 46th Ward. Some of my listeners, we have a younger audience, might not know what exactly a committeeman's responsibilities are. So why don't you explain to those people what that work entails and what it is that you do as a committeeman?
Sure. So committeemen are elected from each of Chicago's 50 wards and from each of Cook County's 30 townships. In the city, we're elected in the presidential years. So my last election was in the primary of 2020, and the committeeman responsibilities are to we're the official elected leaders of the Democratic Party in the ward. If there is an opening in a government office, if there is a retirement or a resignation, or a seat becomes open in some way, either in the county board, the Illinois legislature, or most recently on the Democratic State Central Committee, the committeemen, based on their weighted vote, appoint someone to fill that seat. And then, of course, the person typically runs for election in their own right in the following year. So, since I've been committeeman, I've been proud to be involved in helping Jill Rose Quinn, who became the first openly transgender judge in Illinois history, actually the first openly transgender office holder in Illinois history, to help Mike Simmons, who is the first person of color to represent this area in the legislature. He's actually an Ethiopian American, young, dynamic, openly gay state senator, who's really got a great future. Our area also has an interesting history in the legislature. The outgoing state representative of this area, Greg Harris, was the first ever openly gay majority leader of a legislative chamber in American history. And he just retired, and the person holding the seat is named Han Nguyen, and he certainly the first Vietnamese American to hold office in the Illinois legislature. And this community where I'm sitting right now is just a wonderful mix of African immigrants, Asian immigrants, people from immigrant refugee backgrounds from all over the world. We actually have the largest LGBT population of any ward in the city of Chicago, and our representatives so well reflect that diversity of background and experience. So the committeeman also, first and foremost, is in charge of getting as many Democratic votes out in the primary and for the Democratic candidates in the general election. So the rubber meets the road at the ward level. That's the foremost responsibility, is getting Democratic voters out. Here we had some precincts that had a 97% voter turnout in November of 2020. So shout out to Imperial Towers at 4250 North Lakeshore Drive. 97% turnout.
That's
We
great.
had some others that had turnout in the 90s. And
Impressive.
sometimes I think, you can't get 97% of the people to agree that the sky is blue or that the grass is green. So to get 97% of people coming out to vote, just so proud of everybody here. Huge voter turnout. Um, Another thing that the committeemen do is we are responsible for making sure that the elections run smoothly, that there are election judges, that there's election staff on election day. If somebody has a problem, a challenge, a concern, this polling place was supposed to be, was supposed to be open, and or I was supposed to vote here, but now they're telling me to vote here. So that all falls on me to try to make sure that election day and early voting goes smoothly. Um, there are also Republican committee people for these wards and townships as well. So in in interaction with the Chicago Board of Elections, if they have a question, they'd reach out to the Republican and the Democratic committee people. Now, of course, in the areas that are more Republican, the Republican committeemen there would have more of an outsized role. In the 46th ward, because we're overwhelmingly Democratic. The turnout in the Democratic primary is 9-10 times what it is in the Republican primary. Um, but just as a student and fan and viewer of politics, this mayor's race is interesting in so many different ways. So happy to answer any questions from my vantage point here.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, even just first looking at that work as a committeeman, like getting 97% turnout, I'm not sure my viewers might get it because not everyone's watching politics as closely, but that's an impressively high amount to get people voting. Like you said, you can't get 97% of people anywhere to agree that the sky is blue.
Or
Um,
that Joe Biden won the election.
or that Joe Biden won the election. I mean, that's crazy. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I
We
gotta
even sent our state senator and I sent thank you cards to everybody who lived in the precinct that got 97%.
wow.
And sometimes though I think for all of the views that Chicago residents have, very strong views about politics and policy, sometimes it's surprising to me that overall the turnout in the last mayoral election was barely a third of registered voters. So there's a little under 3 million voters in Chicago. Um, Certainly not all of them are registered, but even among those who are registered, it was only a third, and that was an open seat. That was an open seat mayoral race with, Rahm Emanuel stepping down, and so you had all these diverse candidates. I hope this one is going to have a higher turnout. We won't know till election day, though.
We'll be keeping track of that.
Yes.
Now, looking at this work that you've done, I want to go back to when you first got involved in all of this. What got you involved in Chicago politics, and how did you reach to where you are right now?
Well, thanks for the question. Growing up, my family and I were among the only Democrats in Naperville, it seemed. I remember losing my I marshaled the losing side in the Dukakis Bush mock election in sixth grade,
Oh.
first defeat. Um, and but like we were I feel knowledgeable and active in politics growing up, but I really only followed it right around the election, like a lot of people. Always thought there was something fun about watching those election returns. It's very, it's very exciting. The not knowing what's going to happen, and you have your side that you root for, like in a sports, like a sports team.
Yeah.
My side was always Team Blue. But when I went out to college in Washington, I wanted to go into the foreign service track. Um, but I remember seeing a flyer on the wall at a building on campus that said College Democrats meeting Tuesday at 7 o'clock. I said, well, I am in college and I'm definitely a Democrat. Why not check it out? And that College Democrats group, so well organized and so hardworking. They said at that meeting I went to, we've developed a relationship with the Clinton a personnel director at the White House. And if anybody would like to intern at the White House, just come see us after the meeting. So to be 17 years old and be able to and not knowing anybody, had never been to DC before, to be able to just go to one meeting and raise your hand and be able to intern at the White House. What an incredible opportunity. And so I was there during the years that Monica Lewinsky was also there. So in 97, 98, when that whole story broke, I got to go back in time and then trying to remember try and remember those early days. Um, but what's what was interesting about that time and how much things have changed is that the reason the reason you had that whole situation was that there was a government shutdown. um, Congress had just been taken over by the Republicans, by Newt Gingrich, for the first time in 40 years. And during those previous 40 years, I don't believe there was ever a budget disagreement that led to a government shutdown. At least I'm not aware of one. But at that time, that unprecedented time, everybody who was non-essential staff was furloughed. Now we have government budget shutdowns like every week. People don't even
Right.
keep track. But in 1995, it was a big deal. And so, that's how a lot of us got to do, got to do work at the White House that we would not normally have had the opportunity to do. And I remember during that time, the White House staff was preparing for the president's trip to Northern Ireland. That was the first time a U.S. president had ever visited Northern Ireland, and that kind of sparked in me an interest um, in Northern Ireland history and politics. And have a house now in Northern Ireland, and I try to follow everything I can, in terms of that region. So, just showing up at that first College Democrats meeting, and then they organized trips all over the East Coast. I mean, we got to go everywhere from South Carolina to Maine and New Hampshire in the north. So much fun.
That's so
And being in DC, you're at the center of it all, and so it's very accessible. Um, I also I also really enjoyed getting involved in the District of Columbia municipal campaigns, because a lot of folks who go to DC, what you think about is Congress and the White House. And a lot of people who go there and they want to work on Capitol Hill for a House member or a senator, or maybe they want to go back and run for office where they're from. So not a lot of attention, broadly speaking, given to the local offices like mayor and DC council. So I found, even though I was very young, it was very accessible. Like, as a young person who even knows who your DC city council member is, you can get in the mix very very quickly. And I always encourage people who are thinking of going to college in the DC, don't ignore the city of the District of Columbia itself. I mean, fascinating politics and issues there too.
Mhm. That's that's so cool. And to think that that one meeting changed everything.
Yeah.
Wow, like it just goes to show. Now you also mentioned that you worked on President Obama's Senate campaign and in his 2008 presidential campaign. What was that like?
Wow. The 2004, excuse me, the 2004 Senate campaign was very strange in that for a good while we didn't have an opponent. So
Yes.
in the primaries, they said it was going to be the GQ election because he had Barack Obama, very stylish, good looking guy, very popular. And then the Republican nominee was a guy named Jack Ryan. He was married to the actress Jerry Ryan, also like very stylish. They were, I think, of similar age. It was going to be it was going to be a real battle. And then Jack Ryan dropped out. He had some scandals. I think he did the right thing by dropping out. So you had this race that was going to be this titanic battle between two seemingly really strong candidates. And then months went by, and there was just no opponent. They tried to get Mike Ditka, the Bears coach, to run, and he didn't want to run. And they ended up getting Alan Keyes, who certainly a very intelligent man. He had been UN ambassador under Reagan,
Right.
but he lived in Maryland, and so he moved to Chicago and rented an apartment and ran. And I always thought, no disrespect to him, but like, couldn't they have recruited, a small business person any member of the legislature, like literally anybody who lives in the state of Illinois, to run. Very strange situation. But I always remember at the end of the campaign manager said, well, we want him to be in DuPage County for this final weekend. It may have been the penultimate weekend. So, this is in your hands, figure out what you want him to do. And so I set up two assemblies. So I had him speak an assembly at my old high school, Naperville Central. And
Mhm.
then my brother went to Naperville North. So I had him do an assembly at Naperville North. And he had researched I guess North had beaten Central in the football game earlier that week. So in his speech to each group, he referenced the North Central rivalry. And I also remember, like, I think sometimes about how much GPS has improved the life of the campaign worker, because when they told me that I was supposed to drive what they call the lead car, so
Yeah.
I'd be driving my car to, say, Naperville Central, and then Barack Obama and another staffer would be in the SUV or the car behind me. And so I've never liked like following people in in cars, because if the light turns yellow, then like, do you go through? Do you stop? So I remember printing out like 10 copies of MapQuest directions back when that was the thing, and to make absolutely sure that I did not make a wrong turn, and then be driving around Naperville with him lost behind me. But it was a lot of fun. Well, election night 2004, of course, election night 2008 doesn't get any better than that.
No.
Uh, and I'm glad that he, you know, being president can take a toll on anyone. I'm glad he's able to. Now he's working a lot in film, and he's able to get involved in different philanthropic projects, including the Obama Center in the South Side of Chicago. So I feel like he's enjoying his ex-presidency very much.
And I guess you might have played a bit of a role there at some point, right?
I think we won the Senate race by 70 points. Maybe if not for me, it would have only been 69 or 68 points. But
Okay.
going back to his, the initial setup of that race, which was supposed to be very close, um, because Jack Ryan dropped out, that sort of freed President Obama up to campaign more. Uh, you know, to I think have more of a more opportunities to speak to larger audiences. He spoke to the Democratic, of course, spoke to the Democratic convention in Boston in 2004, that famous speech. Um, Sometimes I wonder if he'd been tied down, with an opponent where it was, 50-50 the whole way through. Maybe things would have taken a different course. I mean, thank God he won, but people need to realize that was not a foregone conclusion. Probably at the beginning of that race in 2004, when Bush was, fairly popular. I mean, obviously Bush did win re-election.
Okay.
That was not a certainty by any means. That was supposed to be a barn burner of a race.
Hmm. So, I mean, that's what an interesting story that you have
Yeah.
about that, because I'm still just thinking about it, because obviously I wasn't even born then, but I've read so much about this, and I even have, if I might have it somewhere behind me, President Obama's memoir, and I remember reading about this race and how close it was. So even to think that any difference, I mean, if it would have been that 50-50 race with Mr. Ryan, I'm sure every vote would have made the difference. So no matter what, it would have been.
And I don't know if John Kerry or the DNC or the Obama campaign, would they have even wanted him to go be the keynote at the Democratic convention? Because sometimes if you're in a tough race, you don't want to be the partisan guy. You don't want to be Mr. Democrat. Um, so would he have been chosen? Where would people have said, like, look, you need to be in Plainfield and Schaumburg and Forest Park. You can't be out in Boston giving the big speeches. Who knows? I mean, actually, in that same area, I helped just as a volunteer with Tammy Duckworth, who ran for Congress in that area in 2006.
Mhm.
And some people had said that all the national attention about Tammy Duckworth may have actually, um, been detrimental to the campaign. Um, not criticizing anything that she did, but there was such an intense focus from the national and global media on Tammy Duckworth. And I think some people probably thought, well, this Peter Roskin, who actually beat her in that race in 2006, you know, he's at the VFWs and the Chamber of Commerce and the local papers, and then here we see the this other candidate is on CNN, and in a way, it may have may have that sort of national attention sometimes can be a double-edged sword. I'm sure she would agree.
Right. I mean, and then we were covering races all of last year, and when we were covering Republican primaries a lot in a lot of places, that is a fact that held true even then. So principle hasn't changed. But
Yeah.
let's get into some politics now.
Uh-huh.
So the Chicago mayoral race, extremely contentious, and it's incredibly close. It's anyone's guess of who's going to be in the mayor's office and when this is all over. However, Representative Chuy Garcia and Paul Vallis are right now the front runners in this race, although you can't tell between the two who might end up there. However, to take Mayor Lightfoot's job, as someone who is involved at least more than I am in this part of the city and in its politics, what is your assessment of what's going on in this mayoral race, and who do you think is the strongest candidate right now?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this. I I think the top tier candidates are all essentially tied right now. 4 years ago, the same people now who are saying, "Oh, I guarantee it's going to be," um, well, a lot of people are saying like, "Oh, I guarantee it's going to be Paul Vallis in the runoff and somebody else." Okay, well, 4 years ago, everybody guaranteed it was going to be Bill Daley in the runoff, and many people also said, "Oh, it's going to be Bill Daley in the runoff and someone else, and then probably Bill Daley will win." And then like the actual election happened, and Bill Daley wasn't in the runoff. And the same people who guaranteed what was going to happen 4 years ago are guaranteed what's going to happen now. I look at it like a lottery hopper. Like there's the polling shows five candidates who are in double digits. And I respect for for all the candidates, even those that aren't polling as high. When they do debates, um, everybody has great qualities. I'm just speaking of the polling. So even five candidates are generally polling in the double digits: Wilson, Lightfoot, Vallis, um, and Garcia, and Brandon Johnson. I see it like a lottery hopper or a bingo hopper where all five candidates are going to go up, down, left, right. A million crazy things are going to happen in the next 2.5 weeks, and then two of them will be picked out of the lottery hopper
Yeah.
on election night. That's really how I think. I've seen polls, I've seen media polls that quickly get dismissed by the candidates who are not doing well in that poll. And then I've seen polls from the candidates, and then those are immediately dismissed by the other candidates as being biased. And then I think when you average it all out, it's a jump ball. Um, and yeah, I mean, just every day for these campaigns is a battle over controlling the news cycle.
Yeah.
And I just think as a student fan of politics, it's just really interesting to watch because it's truly a jump ball. I mean, you could see a situation on election day where four candidates get 20%. And we could also see a situation where it isn't decided. We probably will see a situation where it isn't decided on election day. But most people don't vote on election day. There's huge vote by mail ballots. And I think a lot of people are waiting because there's such a large field. Some people are waiting to see, well, who's the main alternative, who are the top two at the time of the election day, and then I'll make a choice between those two. I know a lot of progressives say, well, I like Brandon Johnson and Chuy Garcia, but I want to vote for the one that has the best chance of winning, in which case you shouldn't be voting now. I see why they'd want to wait to see what the polls show.
Yeah.
um so I think, yeah, I think if the election were held right now, you'd probably have four candidates at 20%.
Okay. And it's an interesting assessment, and I love your little lottery ball thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was even watching the forum. I can't remember if it was last night or 2 nights ago, but I was watching that forum, and even then, it was not like there was this really strong candidate on that stage of nine. It was it was just everyone was there was a pretty strong candidate that you couldn't distinguish two top tier out of it. They're all pretty top tier in my view.
Right.
Include like Republican or Democrat. Like you see these people and you think, who on earth is going to be on my ballot in 2 weeks?
Yeah.
So
I would also say in looking at who is certain to vote, I mean that's an important consideration too. I would say that the CTU members, people who are CTU aligned, um, the organizational heft behind the Brandon Johnson campaign, I feel like the Brandon Johnson supporters, they absolutely circled, well, either election day or early vote day on the calendar. No way they are forgetting about this election. I would say the same about the FOP and diehard Vallis supporters.
yeah.
So could that give them an edge if other candidates are sort of um, you know you'd rather be a candidate that has locked in do or die base, which I think some candidates have more of that than others.
Hmm. Well, that is an interesting assessment of the race. Although, unfortunately, we are almost out of time for the interview. But before I do let you go, Mr. Tanner, are there any parting thoughts that you'd like to share with my audience before we conclude today?
Sure. I just want to really encourage people to not just think about the White House and Congress when they think about politics. I've always felt it's important to get involved at the most local level possible. In Cook County and indeed in every county, there are local elected officials who are at the grassroots level are making change, who are really the meat and potatoes behind these campaigns. I know in the Chicago suburbs, I know all of the committee people who represent the suburban townships. All of them would love to have volunteers. I'm happy to help steer anybody who wants to get involved to their local committee person or state legislator or alderman. So I think you're doing a great job at getting people involved at the grassroots level, and happy to do anything I can to help.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your message. It is a big mission for this show to get people involved in politics, specifically young people, because of all the groups that we see. Young people are generally the most disconnected from politics.
Yeah.
And a goal for me as a young politically involved person is to get more of my peers involved. So your message of getting people out there to vote, getting more people to volunteer on campaigns, all resonates so well. So thank you for sharing that message, and thank you for being here on the show with us today.
All right. Have a great day.
And so that does it for us here today at the Ishan S Show. If you liked my commentary, then go ahead and follow the Ishan S Show on Twitter and Instagram for breaking news posts and updates about the show. And if you want to learn more about political stories, then check out my political news blog on the IshanSshow.com and go ahead and subscribe to it. Do us a favor and share this episode and all your other favorite episodes with your friends and family. It's the best way for this show to grow and get more people listening to it. Thanks again for all your support, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.